It's hot. So if you hear this whirling sound to the right of me, it's because I have the fan on in here. The man cave is not well insulated. It's basically an old one-car garage that the previous owner turned into a living space. So the wall that I'm looking at is towards the main house, so it's insulated. The three walls surrounding me are not insulated. So it gets hot in the summertime, it gets cold in the wintertime. These are facts. And to top it off, the one vent that's right here that connects the heat to in here is disconnected. It's BS. But anyhow, you guys don't really care about my home improvement issues that I need to work on. What you do care about is this. I had someone make a comment that, they really like Tacoma and that the price in Seattle is so expensive that they really and truly, and Bellevue so expensive that they really and truly can't afford to live in those places. I mean, they could, but it's a pinch. And Tacoma's a better fit. However, he says that people rarely talk about the smelter plant, the old smelter plant that used to be in Tacoma, and the amount of pollution and toxins that are in the soil. There's soil contamination, and that's left out of the conversation, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And that's a valid concern. However, it's not as accurate as people want to put it out there, right? Tacoma and the net, and I have been incorrect at how fast the city is growing, because I've had all these different projections and things now I don't even look at because it's growing so darn fast. There's so many projects right now that are being planned in the city that it's insane. So a lot of the rhetoric that you hear is to kind of talk negative about Tacoma because they can't. I'm not saying this gentleman is doing that. I'm not saying that at all. But a lot of it is to talk negative about Tacoma because people have a false sense of belief about other places around here who are equally as bad, if not worse. Right? The smelter plant that was in Tacoma, which has now been knocked down, and you now see Dunes Peninsula in its place, polluted. There's no question that it did. But Tacoma is kind of shaped like this. Okay, so it's kind of the coastline is kind of shaped like this. This portion up here, when the wind blows, which wind will blow from west to east, it's blowing that up towards Kent and Seattle and Bellevue and places like that, right? So that's important. So let's talk about that because wind can change directions, and there's all these different factors. And I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, I'm not any of those things. But I can read a map, and all of this stuff has been done, even to the point of where King County, which is Seattle, has a map because King County is more affected than what you may think. There are other places that have been impacted by the smelter plant than Tacoma. Because this gentleman was saying it's surprising how people do not talk about how it's damaging to kids and the arsenic and the lead and different things. And you're right. But looking at King County's Department of Health, they said that the smelter plume project, what is the Tacoma smelter plume project? The plume is a 1,000 square mile area of arsenic and lead soil contamination from the former, I can't say it correctly, but Asacaro smelter plant in Tacoma. Okay? Now, mind you, this plant is long gone. Long gone. It stopped operation a long time ago, but lead and all this other stuff stays in the soil for a long time. Arsenic. So it says levels of lead and arsenic soil contamination can be different from place to place. It is based on distance from the smelter, wind currents, geographic features such as hills, which also saved Tacoma a lot. If soil has been disturbed during construction, gardening, and other activities. As long as if you're in some of these areas, as long as you don't dig, then no problem, right? Keep in mind, a lot of the country has a lot of lead in the soil. Has a lot of lead in the soil because I was around when cars ran on lead gas. The unleaded phenomenon happened a little bit later, but most of the cars used lead. So you have a lot of lead in the ground anyway, no matter where you live, because of cars. Now, arsenic's a little different story, but you have that everywhere, right? But it's the amount that's important, right? Because you're just gonna, no matter what, there's gonna be lead. So it says here they talk about with the funding from the department's ecology settlement with Osarco or Asaro or whatever the hell the name of that company is. They're collecting soil samples from residential yards within a defined service area, providing soil sample results to homeowners along with an explanation of what matters, providing outreach and education to residents, partnering with community and gardening groups to increase education, providing outreach to schools and child care facilities. There will also be testing soil and cleaning up the most contaminated residential yards in southern Vashon, Murray Island, and Ruston, North Tacoma. Now that's important because I'm going to go back to that here in a second. Cleaning up the most contaminated play areas in schools, child care, parks, camps, and multifamily public housing in the soil safety area, providing technical assistance for cleaning up properties during the development, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on and on. When you look at this interactive map, there's different degrees of contamination. There are areas that have over 100 parts per million. Most of that is not Tacoma. Now, one of the reasons why my channel is so small is because I don't try to freak people out and make them panic over something that isn't true or create drama. That's why I have a small channel, because it's truth. It's truth-based. You may have people that dislike it, or they may say whatever, or they may say, well, he's always in his room, or, he always says, a lot. But, and that may be true, but the other thing is I tell the truth. When you look at this map, Vashon Island has more contamination than Tacoma does. Because the way the plant was sitting and the way that the wind blows, it was right in the direct range of it. It is what it is. That doesn't mean that there's not other places that weren't hit. There is. But most of that contamination is over in that area. When you're looking at a map, it's mostly the hoity-toity areas, I hate to say it, the hoity-toity areas of Tacoma. It's not downtown, the Dome District, where I don't live in the Dome District, but it's not over where I live. I'm not going to tell you. It's not over towards Parkland. It's not Spanaway. It's not Lakewood. There's parts of Lakewood, but it's not the vast majority of Lakewood. It's not a good chunk of Federal Way or Auburn or any of these places, or Kent. It's not. That's false. If you look at those areas I mentioned, the vast majority of Tacoma, it's under 20 parts per million. These are facts. When you look at Ruston, and when you look at Point Defiance Park, when you look at Stellicum, parts of Stellicum, Chambers Bay, when you look at parts of Lakewood as you get towards the west, University Place, that's when you have more of a problem. It's more in the hoity-toity areas by far than it is any other place. And I'll show you the link down in the description box below where you can click on it. You can find it yourself. Even in places like Fox Island, which is very wealthy, multi-million-dollar homes on Fox Island, it has more of a problem there than all of Tacoma. Because parts of that island has 40.1 to 100 parts per million. The other part, which is farther away from the plant, had 20 to 40 parts per million. Again, most of Tacoma has under 20 parts per million. But let's not stop there, because Seattle typically gets a pass. Remember, I said 1,000 square miles. That covers a big old area. If you go up to Seattle, the reason why people don't talk about the soil contamination from this smelter plant is because it's kind of insignificant for most of the people, right? Because this study even says that its focus is on Vashon Island, right? And in, what was the other place? Hold on. It'll tell me here in just a second. Vashon Island. Dang it, where? Southern Vashon and Murray Island, as well as Ruston and North Tacoma. Though Old Town, Ruston, Point Defiance, University Place, Proctor neighborhood, the very wealthy, expensive places have more of a concern to worry about than other places. Okay? So I'm not trying to, minimize it there. But where most people can afford to live, where most of the development's going on, it's not an issue. If it was, you wouldn't have hardly any buildings being built downtown, because it would be expensive to do. These commercial buildings would have a lot of work that they would have to do in order to combat the contamination. That's why when you look at the project up at Ruston, it's expensive, not because of the buildings that you see there. That $1 billion project over there is mainly due to trying to fix the soil contamination, which is heavy up in Point Ruston, because it was just the plant was right there. And right where it was, right exactly where you could see it on the map. It's kind of like when you look at the map, right up there at the north where you have Point Defiance Park, and then you come down, you see Ruston, there's like a little lip that comes off. There's water, there's a little piece. That little piece was exactly where the plant was, the smelter. Right there is 100 parts per million. Over 100 parts per million. It's just bad. However, and it's listed as number C on the map. However, that area it's a Superfund site. They completely cleaned that up, and now it's Dunes Peninsula as well as a bunch of other stuff. They cleaned that part up. Now, neighborhoods up in there like Ruston, as I mentioned, and all these other places, these very wealthy places, no, they didn't clean those up. Some other places that are also impacted by this too, they're kind of hoity-toity. Gig Harbor. 20 to 40 parts per million. Sorry, folks, you're going to hear that. 20 to 40 parts per million. But let's talk about Seattle, because Seattle, when you go up there, it also was impacted by this plant. There's more of Seattle that has 20 to 40 parts per million than Tacoma. Because Seattle is such a long city. Tacoma's kind of round. Seattle is kind of a long, skinny city. It's hugging that water, the coastline. And so as the plume goes up, that's where it is. So even though it's 20 to 40 parts per million, there's none in the Seattle area that's greater than, or up in Seattle, that's greater than 20 to 40 parts per million, right? It's typically in Burien, Tukwila, Des Moines, where the airport is. All of that area is 20 to 40 parts per million. There's some right there between Normandy Park and Des Moines where you have 40 to 100 parts per million. But again, it's all about proximity, wind direction, all of that. If you look at where that plant was, it's going to get hit. When you look at Seattle and when you look at Bellevue, they have the same thing as what Tacoma has when it comes to the arsenic concentration. These are pure, hard, honest to goodness, beautiful, tasty facts. It just is what it is. Now, when you go over there by the University of Puget Sound, and when you go over there by Faircrest, yeah, you have the same amount of arsenic as Des Moines and Burien and Tukwila, which is 20 to 40. But when you look at most of Federal Way, also Dash Point, Where we go to hang out, that's 40 to 100 parts per million over there. Because again, it's close to that tip. If you're digging deep down, or not deep, yeah. But when you look at the rest of the area, Puyallup, Parkland, the vast majority of Lakewood, Spanaway, most of Tacoma, like probably 90% of Tacoma, let's say 85 to be on the safe side, because people will say that's not technically accurate. About 85% or greater of Tacoma is under 20 parts per million. These are facts. When you look up towards Blake Island, which is a state park far north, Bainbridge Island even, it has the same amount of arsenic as Tacoma at under 20 parts per million. When you go all the way up to Shoreline, my old stomping grounds in Green Lake area of Seattle, it has about the same, under 20 parts per million. So the reason why people don't really talk about it much is because it's not that big of an issue in most of the area that people live. It is an issue in places where people are very wealthy and not very wealthy, I should back that up. It is in more affluent areas of Tacoma, the Tacoma area, and some of these not remote islands. Some of these are kind of hard to get to. So in some of these islands, absolutely. But when you look at places like Lacey and Olympia, they have the same amount of arsenic as Tacoma. So it's not as much, and most of, unfortunately, Nisqually National Park and Point Defiance Park and some other parks bear the brunt of the toxic. Point Defiance is horrible. But as long as you're not digging in it, you're good. A good part, Murray Island, the whole island is over 100 parts per million. So that's the reason why. Now the Saltwater State Park, which is what you're going to see up there in Des Moines area, right outside of Kent, that's got some pretty bad amounts. But if you're not wanting to move to Tacoma because you're afraid of arsenic, you're going to also have to not move to Olympia, Lacey, Seattle, Bellevue, Kirkland, the rest of the this whole area, because it's the same. It's the same. I'm not trying to minimalize it, but Bremerton, Bainbridge Island, all of those has the same amount as what the vast majority of Tacoma has. I think this map is very important because people can kind of look and go from there and decide where they want to live, where they want to move. When you look at Ruston, the new development, they're all apartments and condos. It's not a lot of single family builds. And so a lot of people don't care because developers have already sheltered or basically paid for all of that cleanup on their site to do what they have to do. That's why it's so expensive. You see what I'm saying? Like over there, it has no choice but to be expensive. For one, University Place, Faircrest, those are more expensive, affluent neighborhoods. You have the North End over there, it's expensive. Old Town, as I mentioned, Proctor, it's more of an expensive area. It just makes sense. When you look at Ruston, Ruston as a town is nothing. It's about a 1 square mile little city. It's not very affluent. But because Point Ruston, a development which is mostly in Tacoma, was developed on a Superfund site, it has to be expensive because they had to spend millions of dollars to clean up the soil. When you look at Point Defiance Park, they don't have to do anything because it's woods. And as long as you're not digging in the soil, unless you're a raccoon or a squirrel, you're good. There's a lot of them over there, Point Defiance. I'm not trying to minimalize this, but it's not enough to say, I don't want to move here. I'm going to get a big job, but I don't want to move to Tacoma because I'm concerned about the soil quality, which you should be if you're choosing one of these locations. Steilacoom, Chambers Bay area, University Place, Faircrest, all of that. But Auburn, Federal Way, Tacoma, Puyallup, Sumner, Seattle, Bellevue, not really something you should be too worried about, right? If it's something to be worried about, they'd be knocking on your door telling you stuff. Like I mentioned in the report, they're actually letting people know that type of thing, and they've been letting people know for a very long time. Keep in mind, when we're talking about this, smelters are not new because this is a big industrial area back in the day right? Timber, lumber, all that stuff. And, you know, we were the hub down here in Tacoma. But Everett also had smelter plume. You know, all these places do. So definitely do your research for sure, but you have more of a problem if you live in Burien in Des Moines, a part of Des Moines, than you would in Tacoma. Anyhow, hope I answered your question. Make sure you join the Discord down in the description box below. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, comment. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.